Home defense ARs, reloading for semi-autos, reticle calibration, and more this week on Mail Call Mondays. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Here on another lovely Monday morning, and we're going to step off the precision rifle track just for 1 second here, because our first question comes from Justin, and Justin asks, AR for home/self-defense. How do you have yours set up? What ammunition/bullet do you use? Well, there are a couple of considerations when you're trying to figure out an AR-15 for home defense. The first being what your skill level is with actually clearing rooms. It's considerably more difficult to clear a structure with a long gun than it is with a pistol when you're doing so on your own. When you're going through and clearing structures in a team environment with long guns, then very often when you have to open a door, one team member will open the door while the other covers the opening. That way, as soon as the door is open, if a threat is seen or if a threat tries to come out the door, then the other team member is concentrating solely on engaging that threat, not monkeying around with the door. When you're working with long guns and you're trying to open doors, go around corners, etc., you have to really be cognizant of that extra length that you have sticking out in front of you. When you go to open doors, you're going to have one hand to use the door and one hand on the rifle. So if you decide to build up a long gun for home defense, that's something you have to keep in mind, that you need to be able to control that rifle with one hand. That means you need to have a lighter package, you need to have a more compact package. Now, once we get past those limitations, you also have to consider the ammunition that you're using. If you go and grab some just surplus M855, that's the 62 grain military round that has a tungsten steel penetrator in it, that's going to be some bad juju for inside a house, inside a structure. Even if you have a threat appear right in front of you, you engage that threat, those bullets are more than likely going to over-penetrate. They're going to go completely through the threat. They're more than likely going to go completely through the walls behind the threat. They may even have enough energy to continue and exit your house and penetrate into another house that's adjacent to yours. This is a really bad thing. Even in a life or death situation, you are still responsible for every single round you fire, and you're responsible for the damage that those rounds do should they go on beyond the target that you intended to hit. So, if I'm utilizing an AR in a close combat situation, I like to stick with the lighter weight bullets, the 55 grain bullets. Now, the magazine I have here, we just have some standard Federal 55 grain ball rounds. They're crimped and they have a cantilever on them, and these are generally traveling at a pretty high rate of speed. What they do when they impact the target, since they're just light copper jacketed bullets, they really have a tendency to tumble and fragment. When we step up a little bit higher in ammunition cost and performance, you run into stuff like the ammunition that I use on duty, which is the Federal TRU 223E round. That is a 55 grain hollow point bullet, and they really have a tendency to disintegrate when they impact the target. So you'll get penetration that's deep enough to impact vital organs in a close range environment, but that bullet is designed to fragment and to not penetrate beyond the target itself. In the same vein, if you start hitting residential walls, if you have a miss and you hit a drywall, more than likely it's not going to penetrate beyond the room beyond that wall. You may have penetration completely through the wall because sheetrock is fairly lightweight material, so that bullet may go through the wall, but it more than likely will not go beyond the wall behind that. And if it goes beyond the wall, it may not have enough energy to do catastrophic damage to any friendlies inside the other room. Still, we are responsible for every round we fire. We need to make sure that those rounds are going where they belong, and we need to make sure that we do not have friendlies on the wall behind the target. Now, when we get down into the actual rifle itself, this is what I have set up here lately for a all-purpose rifle. You notice it's got a magnified optic on it. A magnified optic is not the best choice for a close quarter battle rifle, for something that you're going to use inside your house, inside structures. But I really wanted to try to do an all-purpose rifle when I set this build up. One of the most notable features on this is the Law Tactical AR folding stock adapter that we have on here. I've been working with these for quite some time. We've been a little remiss in getting the full review out on the Law Tactical adapter, but it's basically because I wanted to have a lot of time working with this to see how the adapter held up as it broke in. It's worked pretty well. We have these on a couple of different rifles running around here, and it really takes a full-size 16-inch barreled AR and allows you to fold it up into a very compact package. You really wouldn't have much of a problem dropping this rifle into a gym bag. It's easy to store, easy to transport, easy to keep in smaller packages. You can fold this up, and there are a lot of dresser drawers that this would fit in just fine, so you don't have to keep it out in the open. You can leave it secured, you can leave it in a concealed location and still have quick access to it when you need it. Now, it has a collapsible stock on it, and the reason I put a collapsible stock on it is because when you're utilizing a rifle in a CQB type situation, you usually want to be a little bit more squared up to the target, and that requires a shorter length of pull. If you're not familiar with that kind of stance, it's kind of an isosceles stance for the rifle. If you're not familiar with it, then don't worry about it. Use whatever you're comfortable with. If you use a traditional rifle stance, that a longer length of pull will work better. Coming forward here, I have a full-length handguard, and on a 16-inch rifle, a full-length handguard allows me to stretch my arm out a little bit more. And as I mentioned, I like to use a more squared-up stance, so when I square up to the rifle, I can get that arm out here, I can get that thumbs forward grip, and it allows me to swing the rifle a little bit more efficiently. This is a SLR Rifle Works handguard. It's their Intrepid Key Mod handguard, which we've been working with for a little while. Really has some neat advantages to it. It has the key mod section here, so if you want to mount something here, you can. It doesn't have rails on the side, so it's really nice and slim. It has rails on top, rails on bottom, and two little small rail sections right here. Now, I went ahead and covered these rails with ladder rail protectors, and the reasoning is because on the scalping on the SLR handguard, while it saves some weight, makes the rails rather sharp, and it's really easy to tear up your hands on them when you're using bare hands. Shooting carbines or shooting AKs in a range environment or in a tactical environment, I'm usually wearing gloves. In a home defense situation, you're not going to stop and take the time to fish out your gloves. You're going to want to just grab the rifle and go. Now, forward on the railed handguard, you'll see we have a Surefire X400 mounted here. An X300 would be just fine. You want some kind of weapon light mounted on it so you can identify the target. It also gives you a tactical advantage when you light a target up, because it's going to momentarily blind them, it's going to startle them. If their eyesight is dark adapted, then it's going to give you the upper hand. Not every situation is going to be a shoot situation, so should you encounter a situation where you don't feel justified in firing a shot, being able to blind your opponent and gain the upper hand may really help you out. It's just a good thing to have. There are countless situations where there have been friendly fire casualties where someone has shot what they thought was an intruder only to find out that it was a friend or family member. So being able to identify your target is paramount. You cannot shoot unless you can identify what your target is and that it is indeed a threat and not a friendly. So some type of weapon mount or weapon light is necessary. It's very difficult to handle a flashlight and a long gun at the same time. It takes a lot of practice. It can be done. I've trained to do it, but it's a lot more difficult than running just a weapon mounted light like this. Now the reason we have an X400 on here instead of an X300 is because the X400 has an integrated laser sight built into it. Since I'm running a magnified optic on here, I want to be able to have an accurate close range sight, and that's what the laser gives me. I don't really think lasers are ideal as primary sighting systems, but as a secondary sighting system, or if you're an officer that runs a shield or something like that, a laser on a long gun can be advantageous. If you're just looking for a weapon length, the Surefire X300s can be had for considerably less money than the X400s. The X400s, the addition of that laser adds quite a bit of price to it. Now we're running a 16-inch barrel on this rifle. That's because really that's the most compact barrel that you're going to be able to use on a rifle that hasn't been registered with the NFA, with the ATF. If you go below 16 inches, you have to register it as a short barrel rifle. That's an additional $200 tax. It's going to take quite a few months to get that registration through and get it back. Depending upon your state's law, your state may not allow short barrel rifles, so you need to make sure you check on that. A 16-inch barrel is still fairly easy to handle around the house. You see that we're running a full-length handguard, so the barrel's only coming out a little bit past that handguard. It's really not that big of a deal. Now if you look on the tip of our rifle here, we're running an AAC brake on this rifle, mainly because I wanted to try this out. However, for a rifle that is primarily going to be a home defense gun, something that you're going to be planning to shoot indoors, a brake may not be a good idea. Generally, you're not going to have time to grab ear pro, you're not going to think about it, you're just going to want to grab the rifle and go when you hear that bump in the night. Firing a braked rifle indoors is very, very loud. There's a lot of concussive force to it. If you have any kind of barrier to your sides or directly in front of you, it's going to reflect that blast back at you. And while if you're in a fight or flight situation, you may experience what's called auditory exclusion, meaning your brain does not accept anything that comes in for your ears. You may not actually hear the gunshots, or the sound may be greatly diminished to your mind. That doesn't mean that that gunshot is not causing significant damage to the physical structures of your ear. So while it may not sound loud to you when you're amped up, it actually is still doing damage to those physical structures. It is damaging your hearing. It may damage the hearing of your children. It may damage the hearing of your spouse. So you want to keep that in mind. While surviving a lethal encounter is the absolute first and foremost concern, being deaf for the rest of your life because you touched off 2 or 3 rounds from a braked rifle inside an enclosed structure or inside a hallway may not be the best outcome. So consider running either a standard flash hider or one of the muzzle devices that's designed to either throw that concussive force forward or get it away from your ears. These brakes direct that sound energy straight out to the side, and almost any place you go inside a structure, there's going to be something to the sides to reflect that sound back towards you. That's one of the reasons I don't recommend brakes for officers that are shooting patrol rifles in enclosed environments. If you can run a suppressor, run a suppressor. Ideally for a home defense carbine, if you can run a 10.5-inch barrel and a suppressor, that's going to be the best way to go. It's going to give you the least chance of hearing damage. It's going to be the handiest package to have. Overall, this rifle as it is a great truck gun, great general purpose gun. If I was changing this up for home defense, again, I would put some other kind of muzzle device on it. I might go to a short barrel and a suppressor, and I more than likely would cut back to a 1X close quarter battle sight like an Aimpoint or a Bushnell TRS-25, EOTech, something of that nature that I don't have to deal with the magnification problems. For a general purpose rifle, I really like this the way it sits right now. So I hope that gives you some ideas on things to look for a home defense rifle. The biggest thing about it though is when you get your rifle set up, make sure it's clear, make sure there's nobody in your house, and then run through your house and do some training. unless you are really well trained at close quarters battle and room clearing, it's generally going to be best if something occurs in your house to bunker into a room, dial 911, and wait. You're going to be in a better position as a set-in defender than you will if you go out and try to search for the threat. That can just get you into some very bad situations. Now, if you have children in other rooms, if you have to go gather up the kids and bring them back to your safe room, then that's one thing. I have tons of rifles to grab. When things go bump in the night at my house, I generally am grabbing a handgun because I'm quicker flowing through a structure on my own with a handgun than I am with a long gun. And I do this pretty regularly. It's not a strange occurrence for me to have to clear a structure in my regular day-to-day life. So rifles are great. They're the best tool for a tactical team. They're the best tool for team room clearing. For clearing your own house, you may want to consider just getting a good handgun with a weapon light on it. So it's a really long, drawn-out answer, but I hope that covered some of the points that you were looking at. Our next question comes from Brian. Brian asks, I plan on buying an annealing machine soon. Do you have any recommendations or advice on a specific machine or method? I'm leaning towards the Girard or bench source. Well, I haven't used the bench source, but I have used the Girard. And if I was going to buy an annealing machine right now, the Girard would be my selection. It's very easy just to get it set up to load up the hopper full of brass and let it run while you're doing some other reloading task. Because we are dealing with an open flame, you don't want to set it and then walk out of the room or go do something else. You don't want something to happen, the cat to knock the thing over and that blowtorch to catch the drapes on fire. So you want to make sure that you are in the same room and you're able to observe what's going on, but it's a great tool. You just load the thing up and let it run. It's kind of expensive, but for what it does, I really haven't seen a whole lot out there that I think is as well designed and as well laid out. TJ asks, how do you remove old bedding from a stock? Not sure if it matters, but I think this particular one is Acroglass. Well, TJ, there's really nothing to do but grab the Dremel or the die grinder and grind that stuff out. Try not to get too deep into the bedding block. If you nick the bedding block here or there, it's not a big deal, but you really want to get that stuff knocked down. That way, when you lay the new bedding material in, it can grab on to the stock and it can bite into the bedding block. It's not biting into that old bedding material. So grind it out. Lay the new stuff in, you're good to go. If you get some gouges into the bedding block or into the old stock material, not a big deal because that new bedding material is just going to flow in there and fill that. Sean asks, how about the VXR review? Well, I'm sure you're talking about the Leupold 3-9 VXR Patrol, which is the scope that we have mounted right here. I've been doing quite a bit of work with it, and the short review on it is, this is a great buy. It's not that expensive for what you get. You get mill turrets, you get the TMR fire dot reticle in it. It's a 3-9 magnification, which is a great magnification for a general purpose rifle. 9 is a little bit low for the top end for a precision rifle, but for an SPR or something of that nature, maybe even a hunting rifle, this I think would make a great hunting scope. You're going to be good to go. One of the glass is really clear for this price point scope. I was really happy to see that. The reticle works very well. The fire dot setup on this is great. I really can't tell you how happy I was working with the fire dot reticle. The fact that it's just a push button on the backside here on the illumination turret. You just push the button to turn the reticle on, push and hold, and the reticle will go off. You just tap it to set the different brightness levels, and it has an automatic shut-off feature. If you leave the rifle lay, then the reticle will shut off on its own, and it has a motion detecting feature. So if you come home, you throw the rifle in the safe, you forgot to turn the reticle off, then it will shut off on its own. Now if something goes bump in the night and you grab this rifle real quickly, the reticle will now come back on to the previous brightness setting that you had, and it's ready to go. Additionally, if you don't want to use that feature, if you just want to shut it off on your own, you can get the brightness setting tapped in to where you want it. You push and hold, the reticle will go off. As soon as you push that button, it comes back on at the previous brightness setting. So this is really great. There's not a whole lot of fumbling to get the brightness that you want. It is daylight visible, and you can dial it down enough that it's not distracting at night. So really, I think it is a great reticle for this type of setup. Now there is a drawback to this scope. It is a second focal plane reticle, so it is only mil correct at 9 power. At 3 power it is not, and because there isn't really a good divisor for 9, then you're really stuck at just cranking it to 9 when you want to use the subtensions in the reticle, or leaving it on 3 power if you're just wanting to use it fast and dirty. It's not a problem as long as you remember that. I had some problems when we were working with it because that wasn't something that was sticking in my brain. It took me a little bit to get back out of the first focal plane reticle world and remember that this is second focal plane reticle. The only time it really bit me was I had it on an intermediate magnification setting and I was trying to run the steel real fast just by getting holds. And it took me a minute to realize why I was missing targets, that I needed to crank it back up to 9 if I wanted to use holds to hit those targets. Now, no matter what the power setting is, the turret is correct. So you can dial 1 mil on the turret and it's 1 mil downrange, no matter if it's on 3 power, 4 power, 5 power, 9 power, etc. Overall, it's a great scope. We haven't abused it yet. I haven't got it in the dunk tank, and that will be done before we get the full review done. But overall, really sweet deal. If you're wondering, the caps that we have on here are the new Butler Creek tactical caps. They are a rubber cap instead of the old plastic that likes to break off, and you can pull them back and they will snap out of the way. You slip them down and stick them in there and they stay shut. We've had them pop open here now and again, but these have been closed on this rifle for probably 2 or 3 days now, and they stayed closed when I pulled it out of the safe to do this. So these caps may be worthwhile. I know if I didn't mention them, you guys were going to ask in the comments anyway, so that's what I have stuck on here, the new Butler Creek tactical caps. So far, I can give the VXR Patrol 3-9 a thumbs up. If you don't need a first focal plane rifle scope, if you're looking for something for an SPR or maybe a 308 hunting rig, this is good to go. It's a great scope to roll with. Our next question comes from Savan. Savan asks, what are the pros and cons of swaging versus reaming as it pertains to decrimping the primer pocket of mil-spec brass? I just started reloading and have a swager on my list. I'm just wondering how removing brass rather than reforming the brass will affect accuracy, case life, etc. Well, Savan, I don't know that accuracy or case life will be affected regardless of if you ream that crimp out with a cutter or if you swage it with something like the Dillon Super Swage. What I can tell you is it's going to be cheaper to ream it out with some kind of hand cutter, and it's going to be easier and quicker to do the Dillon Super Swage. I recently went through a whole mess of cases using the Super Swage, and once you get it set up and you get a rhythm going, it's really fast to run those cases through. Previously, I have put a cutter to cut the primer pocket crimp out on the RCBS Prep Center, and that really wears your fingers out quick. It takes a lot to go through and cut them out, but it is the cheaper route to go. So that's really how I would decide to do it, either cheap or a little bit more expensive and a whole lot quicker to operate. The Dillon Super Swage is a great tool. That's the route that I would go. Luckily, I have a friend who has one, and it's not something that I need to use all the time. So I'll save up a bunch of cases that I need to go do it, run over to his house, take care of it over there, and be done. So if you're going to buy one, that's the route I would suggest going. And you may be able to find some buddies in your area that reload. Kick together your cash and buy it, and then just pass it around to whoever needs it at the time. removing those crimps is really a one-time operation for the life of the case, so it's not something you need to do every time you reload. Aaron asks, 700 police model rifles. Does Remington do anything special for these, or are they the same as their consumer rifles? Well, I haven't actually been to the Remington factory, but I have been through the Remington Certified Armorer's course, and what they told us there is that the police model rifles are assembled on a different line than the commercial offerings. For instance, the 700 Varmint. They go through extra quality control checks, and they do have an accuracy guarantee on those rifles, whereas the standard commercial Remington offerings do not have an accuracy guarantee. Other than that, the actual components that go into the rifle are pretty much the same. If you buy a 700P, it's going to have the same barrel and the same action, same trigger group as if you bought one of the 700 Tacticals or the SPSVs, etc. So you're just paying a little bit extra for some extra quality control checks. Generally, what we've seen on the accuracy side of things is they're very equivalent. You may get a lemon every now and again with the commercial side, whereas I have seen fewer lemons with the police side of things, which is kind of reassuring since the police rifles would ideally be used by law enforcement members who are using them to protect life. So I'm glad that they put extra quality controls in there, but as a civilian shooter, as a target shooter, I don't know that I would pay the extra for it. Personally, I did not. When I built up my last Remington rifle, I just got an SPS Varmint action and barrel, and I dropped that into a chassis system, and it's been a very accurate shooter. That rifle has shot as consistently and as accurately as any of the 700 police models that I've seen. So there are extra quality control checks. It's on you to determine if those extra quality control checks are worth the extra money. Michael asks, can you change the calibration of a second focal plane scope? Well, Michael, I'm not really sure what you mean by the calibration. If you're talking about the turrets, then no, the turrets are set at the factory, and it's based on the thread pitch and the click settings that are on the actual turrets themselves. That's a machining operation, so once it's set, it's set. If you're talking about the actual reticle, then a second focal plane scope allows you a couple of tricks that a first focal plane scope does not. First of all, if you're using a second focal plane scope, you always need to check the calibration of the scope to make sure if it says it's mil accurate at a certain power, that it actually is mil accurate at that power. Some of the lower end scopes may not have had the lenses set perfectly in. The magnification ring may not actually be set perfectly or marked perfectly. So there may be slight variances. So if you take a board, you mark it every 3.6 inches and you put it out at 100 yards, then the hash marks in your reticle should line up with the marks on your board at the mil correct power. Now, let's say for instance that you have a mil rifle scope and you want that to be calibrated for MOA. Then what you can do is take your board out, mark it with marks at every 1.047 inches as you go up. Then take your rifle back, sit at your 100 yards away from your board, and turn your power ring until you see those hash marks line up on your board where you want them to. If you want them to line up with, one hash mark every 5 MOA or one hash mark every 10 MOA, whatever, just dial that power ring until you see where those marks line up, and then mark them on your power magnification ring. That way you know it's correct at this subtensions or this calibration at this magnification. It sounds a little bit in-depth, but it's really fairly easy to do, and that way you can get some more flexibility out of that second focal plane scope. That doesn't make me want a second focal plane scope more than a first focal plane scope, but if you're stuck with the second focal plane scope, it allows you to get a little bit of utility out of it. So, in theory, you could actually convert a mil reticle second focal plane scope with MOA turrets into a matching reticle and turret setup if you go to that trouble. So try it out. It doesn't cost you anything. You can wipe the marks off your scope if you don't like how it works later on. So I hope that answers your question on the calibration. Next, Jeremiah asks, do you have more planned for the basic shooting videos in the works? We do have more for our Precision Rifle Skills series in the works. It's just a matter of getting time to get out to the range to film those. We haven't abandoned it. We are going to go forward with it, and we're going to do little snippets as we get a chance to show you each one of the skills that's required in firing a precision rifle. So stay tuned for that. Timothy asks, what type of reticle would you recommend for new shooters? I don't really have a specific reticle that I would say is great for new shooters. I have specific reticles that I prefer, but as a new shooter, when you're just getting into the sport, you're going to be limited to what reticles are available on the scopes in your price range. I generally recommend a mill-based reticle. You want something with hash marks instead of dots, and you really want that reticle broken down maybe as fine as 2/10 of a mil. If you can get a reticle with some kind of wind hold dots that are off to the side of the vertical stadia line, then that's a good option as well, because it will help you when you're holding for both elevation and wind. So those are just some things to look at. Other than that, you need to look at what reticles are offered in your price range, and be careful of reticles that start to get too busy. When you throw too much information into that reticle, you can start to lose targets at lower magnification at longer ranges. Steven asks, AICS magazines, and who makes compatible models? Well, right now the three big ones are obviously Accuracy International branded magazines, Accurate Mags, and Alpha Mags. Those three are what I see the most. The Accuracy International branded mags, those are generally the most reliable. I've seen fewer problems with those magazines than anything else. Usually when we're out at the range and we see somebody with an AI-based system and they're having feeding problems, those feeding problems can be traced back to cheaper mags. Now, Accurate Mag is almost an exact duplicate of the Accuracy International magazines. They're made just a little bit cheaper, but most of the time they work. We have not had a chance to try the Alpha magazines. The Alpha Type 2 magazines allow you to load a little bit longer than what the Accuracy International magazines do, because they don't have the stiffening plate in the front of the magazine. So if your rifle's set up to be able to take a longer cartridge overall length, then the Alpha Type 2 mags may be something to look at. They're also generally a little bit cheaper than regular Accuracy International brand magazines. I tend to try to stick more towards Accuracy International magazines because they are a known quantity, they're known quality. I know that they work. I don't really have to worry about them. But we're going to try to get a couple of different magazines in and try them out in the long run. I have had Accurate mags in before, and sometimes they work, and sometimes we had some issues with them. But at the time, I wasn't able to determine if that issue was based solely upon the magazine or if that was an issue with the weapon system that I was using that magazine in. So, try them out. If you really need something that you're absolutely sure is going to work in an Accuracy International system, use an Accuracy International magazine. If you need to get a longer cartridge overall length, then maybe give the Alpha Type 2 magazines a try. Jason asks, why different powders make the same bullet shoot good/bad when working up a load for accuracy? Well, Jason, the simple answer is the powders have different chemistry, they have different burn rates, they have different characteristics. So different powders, the burn rate will be better suited to different bore diameters, different bullet types, different bullet constructions, and different case capacities. So what you really need to do is you need to look through the reloading manuals. You need to see what powders work for that cartridge, and then you need to see what out of those powders is most optimized towards your rifle. Sometimes it's just a simple matter of looking on the internet and seeing what the vast majority of precision rifle shooters are using, and sometimes it may take quite a bit of an experimentation to figure out which powder works best for you. I don't have a whole lot of time and money to invest in powders, so what I will generally do is look and see what the vast majority of guys have been using. I will read as much as I can possibly read, and then I will pick one or two powders and I will try that out in my rifle and see which one gives me the better results. So that's basically the down low on why you will see so many different powders for a specific different cartridge and have so many different results with them. CJ asks, Having read an article on the disadvantages of a 308 bullet for long range, would the smaller 243 with a higher velocity be more advantageous way to go if you're not shooting further than 1,000 yards? Well, CJ, I do think the 243 is a better way to go for long-range shooting versus the 308. It's not so much because of the lighter bullets, it's because I'm actually shooting the heaviest, higher ballistic coefficient bullets available in the 243 bullet range. If you look, you're looking at the ballistic coefficient of the 243 versus the ballistic coefficient of the 308. To get the same ballistic coefficient that I'm getting from 107 grain Sierra Match King in the 243, you have to really exceed what the 308 is capable of launching in bullet weights. When you start to get up into those really heavy 308 bullet weights, you're now launching them at a really low velocity because the cartridge just can't carry enough powder to push them faster. So with the 243, I can shoot a higher ballistic coefficient bullet faster than an equivalent bullet in the 308. Higher ballistic coefficient at higher speed means I'm going to get less wind drift and I'm going to get less drop for the bullet over the same amount of distance. Less wind drift and less drop just simply means I have more room for error when I'm shooting that cartridge. So that's why I think the 243 is better than the 308. And pretty much the same thing applies to the 6.5 cartridges versus the 308. Now when you get into 6.5 versus 243, there's really a whole lot less difference in there. I've been going back and forth between the two of them, and what you'll end up gaining with the 6.5 is longer barrel life, and very often the numbers are really close. Sometimes you get a marginal advantage for the 243. Sometimes there are some bullets that work a little bit better for the 6.5. So when you get in there, it's really a whole lot closer than versus the 308 for either of those two. John asks, regarding cartridge overall length, I watched Mail Call Monday's number 22 bullet seating depth and understand from the video that the factory Remington has a very long throats and seating the bullet well beyond magazine dimension will not touch the lands. For the heck of it, I went through the process in this video on my Remington 700 and the bullet contacted something, but with the bullet extended way out, so much that the bullet's only seated about 1/10 inch or less. Don't worry, I'm not loading bullets like this, so this makes me wonder what is the minimum amount that a bullet should be seated in the neck or the case? Well, the rule of thumb, and you guys know how much I hate rule of thumbs, but rule of thumb is 1 caliber length inside the case. So if we're loading a 30 caliber cartridge, then we want at least 3/10 of the bearing surface of that bullet inside the case. Now the bearing surface is actually the part that's going to grab the rifling or grab the case neck in this case. It's not the boat tail, so you can't measure from the base of the round. You have to measure from the start of the boat tail forward. So you want 1 caliber length of that in the neck. So if we were running a 243, we want at least 2.5 tenths. If we're running a 22, we want, at least 2/10 stuck inside that case neck. Now if you start pushing it out a little bit further, that's on you to determine on if that's desirable, if that'll work with what you're trying to gain. But the risk that you run is you have less neck gripping the bullet, and when you have less neck gripping the bullet, then you may have less neck tension. You may have a greater possibility of either pulling that bullet out or canning that bullet to one side or the other, which is going to change the way it engages the rifling when you fire the bullet. So really you want a good amount of that bullet still inside the case neck so that the cartridge holds together well. You can experiment with it, see what's going to work for you. Again, when you're working up loads, if you're going to try with the bullet jammed, make sure you work the load up with the bullet jammed and then work the bullet back off of that. You don't want to work up a load jumping the bullet with considerable amount of the bullet in the case and then take that same load and go to jam. You may end up with a high pressure situation. So play with it and see what you want to get, but loading them way long and having very, very little of that bullet in the case generally is not the way to go. And our final question comes from Steven. Steven asks, how do you size brass for your semi-autos? Full length, small base, or just a regular die? Generally for me, just bumping the shoulder back 2/1000ths with a standard full length sizing die has worked well. I don't have anything that requires a small base die. All of my chambers are decent enough that just a regular full length sizing die will get it. What I would recommend is if you're starting out and you're trying to load for semi-auto, then go back, watch our reloading series so that you know what we're talking about, bumping the shoulder back. But get your dimension off of a fired piece of brass out of that semi-auto. Take your measurement, set your full length sizing die so that you're pushing that shoulder back 2 to 3/1000ths, and reload up some test rounds and go through and see how those work. See if you have any problems with them jamming. If you have a situation where that's not working, even at full length sizing, then you may need to go with something like a small base die to try to get that case down and get it resized well enough to fit in the chamber. The main reason that I don't just full length size everything for semi-autos is because I really want to work that brass as little as possible. So only bumping it back 2 to 3/1000ths, it's only blowing out that 2 to 3/1000ths every time I fire. I'll get a little bit more working life out of that brass versus crushing it all the way back down to SAMI dimensions and then blowing it all the way back out to the chamber every time. So again, start out with our guidelines and then play with it, see what you get, experiment on your own. That's about all we have for this Mail Call Mondays. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Again, we got a lot of stuff going on here. We're trying to work through a lot of reviews, a lot of products on the table, and we're getting them out as quickly as possible. Work has been hell here for the last couple of weeks, so I've really had trouble getting caught up on our videos, but we're working on it. We have a couple of other products that are coming in that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. Some of them you guys have requested quite a bit, so stay tuned and keep an eye out for what we've got coming for you. If you've liked the video, please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot!